This program has been approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive credit for this program, please submit your full name, IDCEC number, program class code, and your summary essay to ceu@iida.org. The program class code is located alongside the title of this program on the IIDA Academy page. For a certificate of completion to use toward another certifying body, please submit the same information to ceu@iida.org. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you all for joining us for Season 6, Episode 2 of Collective Design.
Thanks so much, James, and welcome everybody to Season 6, Episode 2 of our Collective Design webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about how to design your way out of a housing crisis. And I have a phenomenal panel of experts joining me this afternoon. And let me just quickly introduce our panelists, and then we can jump right in. You'll see them listed here on your screen, and as I mention each one, you're going to see them come on live. We have Catherine Buell, who's the managing principal at Wellness Real Estate Innovations. Hi, Catherine.
How you doing?
Very good. And Andrea Miku, principal with Canopy Architecture and Design. Andrea.
Hello.
There's Andrea. And finally, Roger Sherman, who's a design director and leader of the Urban Impact Group with Gensler, LA. There he is. Hey, Roger, how are you? All right. Okay, friends, let's kick this off. And I'll have each of you, those are super brief introductions because we want to jump right into the content. But as you're responding to questions, please feel free to tell the audience a little bit more about the work that you're doing. Right now in the US, we're facing an incredibly staggering housing shortage. Rents are soaring. There's a shortage of somewhere between 4 and 7 million homes. And renters are spending a third of their income on rent, and home ownership is down. There's not even the desire to own a home. And we also know that home stands for shelter and comfort and safety and identity and dignity. And so let's just jump right in. And Catherine, I want to start with you. According to a recent report on NPR, home buyers are paying nearly $1 million for starter homes in some cities. And as mentioned earlier, renters are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. What's our responsibility as an industry? What responsibility do we have as designers and architects in addressing not just affordable housing, but housing in general?
Yeah. Well, first, Cheryl, I wanted to start by saying thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on this panel. Just a little bit about my background to add context to my comments.
Please.
I'm an attorney by trade. I chair the District's Historic Preservation Review Board. I love designers and architects. I think they create beautiful spaces. But I also ran the Atlanta Housing Authority, and I created and launched the Amazon Housing Equity Fund in 2021 as we were coming out of COVID. And when we created the Amazon Housing Equity Fund, there were a couple of tech companies out there doing great work. Started with Microsoft, who invested $500,000 in affordable housing. They were seeing places like Seattle very quickly transform in terms of affordability, and said we can do something about it. And so a number of tech firms jumped in. And at Amazon, we float these 6-page papers, and the Housing Equity Fund started as an idea about 2 weeks after I joined. And the concept was to use very cheap money that the company had to invest directly with project sponsors, developers who were doing affordable housing work on the ground, who could move quickly. We wanted to move at the speed of market. When we launched the fund, we had about $600 million in deals that we could close on, which included an 825 unit apartment building, 1,000 affordable homes in King County, Seattle. So we moved pretty quickly, which was fun. But after seeing something like the Amazon Housing Equity Fund and how quickly $2 billion goes, I decided to pivot a little bit and started my firm called Wellness Real Estate Innovations to really focus on what is next in this affordable housing world. The tools that we have just aren't enough. Low-income housing tax credits, local housing production trust funds, they just don't do enough to start to address the affordability issues. And my firm is really focused on what is the next wave that we need to be focused on. I'll give it a stat. 1 in 5 Americans is soon to be over the age of 65. Boomers are booming. We are not building housing to accommodate that population. And so do we need to start looking at co-housing solutions, bringing back Golden Girls houses? Do we need to start looking at multi-generational design homes, not single family homes, but homes that intentionally have universal design components so that we can start to intentionally address the needs of residents and the population that we have today, as opposed to theoretically who we want to be able to serve and how we want to be able to serve in the tools that we've always had.
Yeah, co-housing certainly is something that's talked about in other countries. Other places do it really well. We do it less well in the US, but I mean, I will definitely sign up for some co-living with a group of folks. Golden Girls or not. Thank you for that, Catherine. Roger, let me ask you, what drew you to your focus on affordable housing and housing equity in the work that you're doing?
Well, that's a great question, one that I'm very motivated by. As an architect, but also as an urban designer, it's very simple. Housing makes cities. You look at the genetic makeup of any city, more than 50%, and probably well in excess of that, is consisted of what people consider cities, consists of its housing stock. Blocks and blocks and blocks of cities. It's not simply the iconic buildings, the museums, and other public institutions. And I felt that as an urbanist, the way that I could have the greatest impact on the transformation of the city was through the transformation of its DNA, which is the housing that makes it up. So in particular, of course, and I know we'll get into this, the problem of cities having to do with equity, lack of equity and diversity, really goes to it needing to be changed at a genetic level by addressing questions of socioeconomic segregation, gentrification, and sustainability at the microcosm level of housing first, rather than simply policy.
Yeah, perfect. And Andrea, let's talk a little bit about how we can, I mentioned the word dignity earlier. How can we companion affordable housing and how can dignity and affordable housing live in the same sentence? Because they should, right? So can great design and affordability converge?
Thank you, of course. And I think that great design in affordable housing is necessary for the success of the project. Canopy, my firm, I'm one of the principals at Canopy Architecture and Design, and we are a Chicago-based architecture firm, and we specialize in a socially impactful, sustainable design, and a lot of our work is in affordable housing. So we just completed and had the ribbon cutting of a 2-building, 89-unit affordable housing campus in Chicago. It's called Encuentro Square. And Encuentro is Spanish for to gather, to connect, and to engage, which describes the synthesis of our design. You know, we included a public plaza, a private courtyard, and direct access from sidewalk to those spaces. And on the interiors, we really focused on healing-centered, trauma-informed design. So areas for transition for a person when entering a new space. So this included, you know, built-in benches or seating near elevators on every floor, spaces for rest before entering in new rooms. We wanted to create a design that promotes the feeling of safety. So visual connections, something as small as a window to a new room that you're about to enter. So you're able to see who's in there before you enter that space. And utilizing vibrancy, right? We have this amazing culture in Chicago. The location of the project was in Logan Square, which has amazing cultural heritage. And we wanted to utilize colors, textures to connect to that culture of the community. There's even a mural by a local community group in the lobby of one of those buildings. So, you know, all of these design choices help create a home for the residents and create something like more of an identity for someone when they're going home.
That's perfect. I was hoping you were going to say that, right? It's not just look and feel, it's identity, that sense of community, material choices. It should never feel less than. Obviously, emotional safety and physical safety are factors. So thank you for that. And sorry for any disruption. My laptop died in the middle of that. And so I had a quick change of venue, and for a minute, it looked like I was in witness protection, but thank you
Oh, it's perfect.
for not missing a beat, Andrea. I appreciate that. Catherine, in your experience, what do people get wrong or misunderstand when it comes to some of these root causes of the housing crisis? And also there are barriers, right, to providing more affordable housing. So tell me a little bit about what people get wrong, but then counter that with what people get right.
Yeah, it's almost like, where do I start? I think people make assumptions about what affordable housing means. Sometimes, you know, we look to lower income areas to concentrate affordability for whatever reason. Some of the design choices, as Andrea mentioned, just aren't conducive to how people actually want to live. That everything needs to be new construction. And that we need to build our way out of this. And sometimes we need to preserve the housing that we have, housing stock that we have, and start thinking outside of the box. And so really getting people to think outside that box. I think what people are getting right is that there's a lot of opportunity to try something new. One of my favorite designers based out of Seattle is Frolic, and they're creating unique communities, unique design communities with shared amenities, including large kitchens that people can use in a communal way. So there are jurisdictions like Prince George's County that see their population shifting, and they are encouraging all of their new construction to have universal design components. And so I'm starting to see that people are thinking outside the box, which is really encouraging. And the last thing I'll say is that some of that means that you're meeting the neighborhood where it's at. One of the projects, actually two of the projects I'm really excited that I'm working on. One is an urban neighborhood. It's in a food desert. And most people think, oh, I'm just going to put in a grocery store. Well, what if you put in a hydroponic, aquaponic gardening system? The other one is in a community that has a large senior population. We're looking at a dementia village. We're looking at a model that is based in the Netherlands, Hoboken. I'm going to totally botch it. But people who are thinking outside the box in terms of how we build and design space to really look at the problems that society is facing a little bit differently, but also creating an exciting, like actual practical environment that people can use.
Yeah. Catherine, can you repeat the name of the firm in Seattle that inspired you?
Oh, absolutely. It's Frolic. And they're awesome. They're doing really great work.
Great, great. Thank you for that. In that response, does it also require that we think about cities differently and what cities mean?
Absolutely. That agrihood concept that I was talking about, most people don't think about cities and farming. Chicago actually has some really interesting examples of urban farming. We have to think about what the needs of cities are and how people actually live in them and where the demographics are shifting, not just how people, where people specifically live. And then we need to think about the assets. So some cities like Atlanta and others, they have a lot of B and C class buildings that can be adaptively reused. What are those assets that nobody's looking at? Are they looking at old schools? Are they looking at underutilized city property? Where are those opportunities to start to infuse affordable housing that other people aren't thinking about within your specific jurisdiction? And last thing I'll say is, where are the partnership opportunities? Do you have a big medical institution that you could partner with? Do you have tech companies that you can partner with? Who are those folks that you need to bring to the table that maybe aren't your traditional players, but could be part of the conversation?
And so some interesting public-private partnerships have kind of grown out of this need as well. Speaking of kind of repurposing place, Andrea, there's a conversation going around that vertical malls or formerly used workplaces that are now empty can be converted into large-scale affordable housing. Is that doable? Has it been done well any place that you've seen? Right? That's not just fan fiction, right? Can we really convert some already underutilized spaces into affordable housing?
Yes, yeah, thank you. And we have been seeing initiatives that support these adaptive reuse projects in Chicago. Currently we're working on a project to convert a 100-year-old church into 22 affordable rental apartments. So construction is going to start June of this year. I'm really excited about that. And we've been working with both the church leader and the nonprofit developing these apartments. And it's going to be a mix of, studios, 1 and 2 and 3 bedrooms. So it's going to be some family units, as well as studio and 1-bedroom units.
Nice.
And I do think like the adaptive reuse process, creating a new function inside of the existing shell, it saves the structure, it maintains the cultural heritage, historical building, and it also allows it to serve the new needs of the community with the new program. So I know everybody is excited about that project coming up.
I love that. I mean, even though it started life as a church, as a place of worship, it gets to live another life supporting human beings in another beautiful way that's almost just as spiritual as a church, right?
Exactly.
When is that project due to be completed?
So hopefully you'll start construction June of this year, so coming up soon, and within a year after that, so sometime in 2026 should be completed and ready for residents to move in.
Yeah. Chicago's a good example. I know St. Louis is another where they're also taking vacated public schools and converting those into live workspaces and affordable housing as well. That seems to be something, and it's happening in the cities as well as in suburbs.
We're actually, if you don't mind my jumping in,
Please, Roger.
On a project using the vacant rooftop of a parking garage on a community college in Los Angeles, because it has privacy, visual privacy. It has access to fresh air and sunshine. It has access to plumbing and electricity through its the sprinkler system and the lighting, and it will cost about half as much money as finding a new piece of land and building from scratch. So we're working through a grant that we received from the Wells Fargo Foundation to develop 125 units of student housing atop the parking garage.
That's fantastic. And Roger, I've also heard conversation around, even as people are concepting, as designers are concepting parking garages, even thinking about what their next life might be
Yep.
when it ceases to become a parking garage. So thinking of that early in the design phase, that it may not always live its life as a parking garage.
Yeah, I mean, it really resonated with me what Catherine said at the beginning, which is that the money is in California. We realized with the $2.2 billion bond measure that the money wasn't the problem. It was the lack of innovation. They kept doing things the same way, and costs kept going up, and we weren't able to deliver the number of units that we promised voters because we're doing it's the Einstein thing about the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. And so this is where design is really needed, is innovative thinking.
So innovative thinking and a bit of advocacy too. And so let me just continue with you, Roger. Are there strategies and tactics that designers can use that promote equitable and affordable housing practice? This is when you become citizen advocates as designers. Yeah. And so what are some small or large ways that as a community and within firms and with our industry that we can do more?
Well, a few that are very interesting. And my group, the Community Impact Group, we work very strategically. We don't wait for clients to come to us. We develop new models and then go to clients who we think would be interested in adopting them. So, for instance, we developed a project called the Grow Home, which is a micro development strategy where instead of it relying upon the spec developer, you go to people in single family neighborhoods. As many people know, California is going through a process now of rezoning R1 single family zones and saying, look, homeowner, you have a problem. You haven't saved enough for retirement. We know that. You have tuition to pay for your kids. You're needing capital somehow, but your lot is actually too big, or you don't need the backyard for your kids to play in now because they're going to college, or they're on their own right now. So instead, we came up with an idea whereby you could actually subdivide your own lot, the back of your own lot, into alley lots, that is, lots that could be accessed off the back alley, as they have in Vancouver, in Tokyo, in Melbourne, and to develop a prototype that could be prefabricated, that would enable a homeowner themselves to actually be the instigator of development, which, if you multiplied it, could be brought to scale and accommodate just as many people as if you take 6 years to do a 50-unit development with a developer. So it's something in between. I think it's called the missing middle in a different kind of way, but it's not an ADU. It's actually a home it's an alley home that actually would belong to a separate homeowner just through subdivision of the lot. Another one is, this is kind of very important, is moving away from this idea that developers produce housing. It's actually not the developer's problem, housing. Housing is a problem that employers should see as something that they bear because they have problems with retention, such as school systems, when their teachers have to drive an hour or 2 hours from where they can afford to live. So what we discovered in working with United Way was that actually if an employer is willing to take out a 10-year master lease, they can hire a developer for a fee simply to build the building for them, to provide for their employees. And what's interesting is that their unions, labor unions, are now adding housing to the negotiating table in addition to salary and healthcare. Yeah. They're looking at housing as a bargaining chip. So a lot of these things are coming together, and it's a lot nicer in terms of design if you know who you're designing for.
Yeah, that's super compelling, Roger. And it also touches on a bit of American history, because in so many communities, large scale industrial organizations, the railroads, created housing for their employees.
Pullman, Illinois comes to mind.
Yeah, I was just going to mention Pullman.
Exactly.
Yep.
And
Kohler,
in fact,
Wisconsin.
I'll just add this, which I think might be interesting to the audience, that in the wake of the fires here, we actually went to the insurance companies and started saying, look, your folks are now without homes and they're getting gouged by people who are trying to overcharge them. What if you think a little bit more proactively and build housing in the event that there is a fire, so that as part of your policy, you can offer people the possibility of actually having a home that's on your own, within your own stock, that they can actually move into in the event that there, God forbid, was a fire. And in the meantime, it could serve as part of your investment portfolio on the other side of your business model.
Yeah, that's so great. And thinking a little bit differently about how we think about as an employee benefits, that if housing, and I know that there are some employers that are, even if not housing itself, looking at crafting low-cost home loans for first-time home buyers, perhaps for younger staff, younger employees, and it's not a burden. It helps you attract and retain talent if housing becomes a part of that employee-employer relationship.
Exactly.
Catherine, Andrea, any thoughts? I want to make sure to have you two kind of weigh in on this. What are some strategies that we as an industry can help support and encourage?
I would plus one on the employer housing. One of the things that I had the pleasure of working on was a regional housing assessment done by the Urban Institute that framed housing as a regional growth issue. So many people think about affordable housing as just low income people, and they don't realize everyday people are finding it hard to afford places to live. And so getting more employers involved because they have flexible capital. One of the questions in the chat was, do we see funding sources drying up? And the answer is a capital YES. They absolutely will be drying up, which means we need more funding sources in the market. We need people funding modular construction solutions so that we can produce faster. We're coming out of a housing boom. So maybe somebody can help with that, more flexible capital. Healthcare companies are starting to invest in housing. So we need more people putting into the system to create opportunities where they don't currently exist.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really glad that we are talking about affordable housing. And I think it's the advocacy and this communication and the need, expressing the need for affordable housing, because there's a large gap between what people can afford to pay for housing and the rents that are being charged in the private market. So I do think it's important to advocate for enough public resources to create more adequate investment in housing programs, state, federal. It's important to continue to invest in housing. That means investing in our communities. And also, the neighbors of the communities that we're building in, for them to realize how important it is to create, equitable housing for everyone.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you for that. And also, Catherine, thank you for that reminder and that distinction that affordable housing is not, it's more about affordability as opposed to housing for those who, for poverty or in under-resourced communities. There also seems to be, when we're talking about neighborhoods, there's the infamous, not in my backyard, also with the conversations around affordable housing. I know that we didn't originally talk about that, but any thoughts around that? Right, that's not exactly a benign concept, and it's something that we all live with. From a organizational standpoint, from a design standpoint, how can we help combat that "not in my backyard" concept? Catherine, I just saw you unmuted yourself. So
yeah,
for that one.
As a practitioner, as opposed to the designer, I would urge everyone on this call to start thinking outside the box, because there's got to be a way. One of the communities I've been working with, they're a wealthy community, primarily single-family homes. People are against large-scale density. It's going to really worried about the fact that it's going to change the character of their community. And there may be some truth to that. It's not just who's going to move in, it's having their community where people kind of have a sense of neighborliness change. And so what can we do within the existing footprint, right? Can we start looking at new ways to break down single family homes that don't appear as though more people are living in them? They're not quite a duplex, but something else. Can we find ways to high density? Designers and architects can do that. So not just getting into these juggernaut debates with community members. We talked about adaptive reuse. That's a huge one. That's actually how at Amazon we got into a lot of communities that people were surprised we were able to get into so quickly. We went to existing buildings. We didn't change the footprint. We just changed the affordability levels for people who would live there.
Yeah. Perfect. Roger, let me ask you, come back to you. Who are our greatest allies in this push to widen access to affordable housing?
Well, along the lines of what I mentioned earlier, because we got when we started doing this in my group about 7 years ago, we got frustrated very quickly over the first 2 or 3 years in working with nonprofit developers, frankly, where we would get to the entitlement portion after 3 months of work, and then the project would basically go to sleep for 2 to 3 years while the developer would go around trying to get funding from a stack of funders, 6 or 7, and waiting on low-income tax credits. And we all felt as though our time was better utilized and the problem was sufficiently urgent that this couldn't be a viable way of doing business and having a sufficient amount of impact. So we've started to adopt over the last 5 years or so is to effectively work around those developers and to partner directly with funding sources and philanthropies. So that's why I mentioned earlier, United Way, Wells Fargo Foundation. We worked with Sola Impact here in LA, which is it's a social impact fund, a $1 billion fund, which owns a lot of property in enterprise zones, specifically in South LA. It's part of their business plan. They've opened their own prefabrication company as well. They really have a tight bottom line because they pay back a double-digit return on investment to their investors, but they're able to have impact very quickly. And they are dedicated against gentrification, of revitalization without gentrification, so that the jobs that come out of the development company and the prefabrication company go to people within the neighborhoods that they're trying to improve. So they've developed something of a circular economy. We're also working with Beneficial State Bank, which is Tom Steyer's bank, which is sounds like a unicorn. It's a mission-driven bank. Turner Impact Capital is another. And that basically, we find that if we can pitch a lot of our ideas to the funders, finding the developers is the easy part.
Yes, yeah.
And so we, instead of always staying behind the developer and feeling very disempowered as designers, we said, forget it. Why are we waiting behind the developer? Let's move out from behind them and get right in touch directly with the funding sources, who turn out to have a greater degree of ambition and openness to innovation.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. And in addition to funding, zoning, and I want to make sure this question popped up in the chat, and I want to make sure we address it now. If you, Roger, or Andrea, or Catherine, want to make sure I ask this question: how does zoning impact those options for building affordable housing?
I've got it. I'm gonna expose my libertarian leanings here.
Go.
In saying that
Go for it.
My experience of zoning has been that frequently the zoning that's created has been created by people who never tested it and understood all of the unintended consequences of the zoning. And so what we've tried to do, rather than just spend all of our time advocating for change, because the problem is that you can increase, they're doing a lot of state regulation loosening in Sacramento, but you still have problems locally reconciling the two things that are conflicting. Is we hack the code. We, for instance, developed a strategy with United Way in which we worked on small lot zoning of R 1.5, R3, and R4 zones, where we found a little known segment a little known article within the zoning code called guest guest residences or guest rooms
Mm.
that used to belong to the days of when you had workers living in these large apartment buildings in downtown, and they've torn them all down. But anyway, it enabled us to actually create multi-bedroom residences, not quite a form of co-housing, where the residences were entered off of a patio rather than a living room, so that you could actually have a variety of people who were actually able to be housed at a fraction of the rent, because they were only really renting a room with a kitchenette and a bathroom,
Wow.
rather than having to necessarily, take out a full apartment and all of that stuff. And I remember very distinctly going in front of the zoning administrator, and they were confounded. They felt obligated to challenge it, but because they had never seen it before. And ultimately they let us through because they couldn't find a reason to deny us permission to do it. But that you got to kind of use a little bit of tricks, a little bit of trickery
Yeah.
to figure out how to use semantics to your benefit.
Well, often solutions and options are laying in full view in policy and
Yep.
buried underneath red
Yep.
tape. Yeah. You're being asked to put some zoning info and language in the
I
chat
can't,
too.
I don't have it right at hand, but I'll see
Okay.
if I can provide
Okay.
that later.
Thank you. I want to make sure Catherine and Andrea, you get a chance to weigh in on the zoning question as well.
Yeah, and I think zoning and community buy-in sometimes goes hand in hand. A lot of our higher density projects do require rezoning in Chicago, and that process and community buy-in is really important to merge them and get everyone happy and excited for the project to come, especially going through the rezoning process. And that's how I think community engagement strategies are really important early on in the process. Talking with the aldermen, talking with community organizers, talking with the neighbors, making sure that they are on board, that their concerns are heard, and we are able to design or at least negotiate their concerns versus our design. Some of that's parking sometimes with Chicago is very important.
Parking is a huge, parking and public transportation are a huge part of this conversation. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do think, the community engagement strategies needs to be, very, very important and thought through in order to get through a rezone to get more density in a site.
Catherine, let me ask you, what is the optimal relationship between designers, developers, and the public, and code officials and zone officials, kind of the ecosystem of affordable housing? What's the optimal relationship for designers in the midst of that?
Yeah. I think, the best designers are like orchestrators who can manage all the personalities. There have been projects that I didn't know if we were going to get over even the start line, because everybody has such a different interest. But designers can really think outside the box. One of my favorite communities, as much as it's a development challenge, it was actually a huge zoning rewrite, creative zoning effort. Is called Serenity. It's in Fulton County, Georgia. It's in South Fulton County, about 20 miles south of the airport. It's established as one of the first wellness real estate communities in the country. There were 3 major redevelopment projects that were going on, and this is actually the only one that actually got off the ground, and it is highly successful. And one of the things that the developer was able to do, because they were thinking outside the box, is they were able to create a new city called Chattahoochee Hills, Georgia, and build into the zoning code an opportunity to do transfer development rights. That allowed density to be in some places. It allowed you to preserve farmland in other places, so you didn't change the character of the neighborhood. Had they not had designers and architects and landscape architects who are really thinking outside the box, and that's just the surface. I love what Steve Green and his team did down there. they would not have been able to create such a unique place. And so really pushing the envelope as much as possible, I think, is critical. And having that kind of design experience be at the forefront of orchestrating kind of these larger redevelopment efforts.
Yeah. Yeah. Roger, did you have a hand up?
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Okay,
Apologies.
all right. Okay, I wanted to make sure I got to you. So we've talked about optimal relationships. We've talked about we can't be developer dependent. Let's talk a little bit about where do we go next? I'd love for each of you to comment on what you're seeing in your world at the moment that makes you feel optimistic, or slightly optimistic, or a little bit optimistic. What's the preferred future for affordability and housing? And what really is the future of affordable housing? And if I could, Andrea, start with you.
Of course, yes. I am feeling optimistic about seeing the push for more affordable home ownership models, co-ops or condos, but in addition to the affordable home rental. But I think home ownership also is very important to see nonprofits, build equity in the community, seeing intergenerational wealth through these programs as well, being able to transfer the home wealth or the home to children, to grandchildren. And I'm seeing that nonprofits and community land trusts in Chicago are focusing. I think the next step is affordable home ownership as well as rentals.
Yeah, that's great. Catherine, what's your preferred future for affordable housing?
Yeah, I really hope we break the mold. I want to take the box and deconstruct it and start all over again. Because there are so many things changing in our country. First, when I talk about affordable housing, I was speaking on a panel at Harvard, and I asked everybody to raise their hand who was concerned about affordability. Everybody in the room raised their hand. This is the term affordable housing is no longer what it used to be. It's all of us struggling. Even if you have a low interest rate, you can't sell your house. Where are you going to go in this market? And so something is wrong with the way that we've constructed this box. We need to break it and rethink it altogether. There are also some demographic shifts that we really need to be realistic about. I mentioned the growth of the boomer population, but by the end of this decade, boomers will outnumber people under the age of 18. Half of the 5-year-olds who are born in industrialized nations are expected to live until they're 100. The way that we live and the way that we want to show up is going to change. And at some point, it may not just be focused on us going to work every day and having a work-oriented life as AI and other tools change the way that we live. We may actually want places that have more social interaction, could provide more of a sense of a community. And so my hope is that as all of the changes are swirling in our country, that folks really start totally thinking outside the box. We need a new model. Low-income housing tax credits are very expensive when you look at the cost per unit. It's just the way that we construct and calculate area median income and use that to determine rent. It's just not working. And most people are feeling like they're at the breaking point. When you're at that breaking point, that really is an opportunity to do something new.
Yeah. And also thinking about how we're between pandemics, right? We're post the last pandemic, but just pre the next one, and how we live in a pandemic resilient community, knowing that there will come a time where we may have to learn at home again and heal at home again and work from home again. And so that causes us obviously to think very differently about just what the concept of home means.
Yeah, well, Roger mentioned the California fires. I mean, even home as a place of resiliency, and the need to think about these issues that we didn't have to consider previously, is going to be a reality for so many of us.
Yeah, that response to natural disasters. Roger, what are you optimistic about? What is your preferred future for affordable housing?
in our group, we have a term that we use called NOAH, NOAH, and it stands for Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing.
Oh,
And what we mean by that is rather than trying to fight the good fight in changing policy or re-entitling, which is just so much squeezing for very little juice on our part, we tend to want to go for the low-hanging fruit. And so, in fact, I think with the current administration and the drying up of the LIHTC funds and the vouchers and so on, this may actually be a silver lining as a means of forcing the issue of how people can become more creative and entrepreneurial in terms of finding areas, gaps in the system where you can actually produce affordability. Two of those trends are in multi-generational housing, meaning that it's something that Americans have always had an allergy to. It's not, we don't produce a lot of it because there isn't a demand for it in this country. You know, there's a cultural bias toward breaking out on your own and going and having your own house and so on. And I actually think that as we get older, as you mentioned, and people live longer lives, the need and the benefits of actually living in multi-generational housing within a family, which in a lot of ethnic groups in Los Angeles has been practiced for a while, will make more and more sense, and people will get more comfortable with the idea, and it will produce both generational wealth and affordability at the same time. The second one is that I'm optimistic about is the openness of part in creating affordable housing. So as an example, we're working with the LA Public Library of all people, who have 72 sites that are all in decay and underutilized. In fact, our chief librarian for Catherine is actually used to be the chief librarian of the Atlanta Public Library System. And he's very interested in making better utilization of their library sites. And in so doing, one of the things that during COVID he realized was that the libraries are starting to serve as community centers, not just as places to get books. And they also make a perfect tenant on the ground floor of projects that we have a hard time filling with retail, even though the planning department is insisting that we put storefronts on that level. So I think if I were to summarize it, I would say opportunism is of the order of the day. And it's up to the designer to be opportunistic, because the developers are by nature are really creatures of habit.
yeah. That's great. Thank you for that, Roger. And I can't think of a better dream scenario than living in a library, next to a library, or above a library. I think that sounds amazing. While I have you, because right, LA obviously just endured fires, but you've got the Olympics coming in a few years. Are there any opportunities that a large event like the Olympics brings to a city in terms of affordable housing?
Well, in LA's case, they're trying to revive the Peter Ueberroth strategy of 1984, which is basically to build as little as possible, both in terms of stadiums and also housing. So they actually are planning to utilize much of the student dormitory housing on the UCLA campus, especially, and a little bit on the college, community college campuses to provide that housing. But frankly, I'm disappointed. I tried to make a really strong pitch to the county, actually a couple of years ago, that this was a great opportunity to build housing under the pretext of providing it for the athletes, and especially transit adjacent, and then converting it to rental housing immediately afterward. But we just formed our committee, sadly, like about 3 or 4 months ago, whereas Paris, even though they were first, were right on it, a good 4 years in advance. So I wish I could say that it was making a difference in providing that impetus, but it was on the mind. Your question was on the minds of many, many other architects.
Yeah, yeah. Andrea, let me ask you a Chicago specific question. One of the one of the scourges in Chicago were those really awful 60s and 70s public housing projects. And for instance, we saw Cabrini Green make that shift. And, there are now aspects of Cabrini Green housing that have become, not affordable at all. And, what's the in between? How do we look at that trajectory from, affordable housing to affordable without making it too precious, right? Cabrini Green has become out of reach for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, some of them it is like a luxury housing around
It's
that
luxury
area.
housing.
And I do think it kind of notes about gentrification and people getting pushed out of their community sometimes. People who've grown up in a community now they can't afford rent, or people who have they work in that community and they have to live an hour by CTA or an hour by bus away and commute in because they cannot afford to live where they're working. And one of those items is how to promote density. So some of the more gentrified areas like Logan Square or Little Village or other areas, Pilsen, are used to have, 2 flats, 3 flats, which is a building that has 2 units, 3 units. And some of these gentrified areas, those units are getting deconverted into a single family home that costs $1 million, $2 million to buy. They're becoming luxury housing. So those neighborhoods just lost 3 affordable units that were natural. And there was no, affordable. It was just affordable because of its size. And then it turned into a luxury house.
Yeah.
So just trying to also limit that that kind of densifying,
Yeah.
making sure that we aren't losing these naturally affordable, smaller 2 flats, 3 flats that we have in Chicago.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We often on Collective Design have a large number of students who tune in. And so several of them are asking questions. What advice would you give to design students and those designers who are early in their career and are very interested in pursuing this interest in promoting affordable housing? What advice do you have for students and young designers within this arena?
I can start. I think it's to join your local community council, or if you are in a neighborhood, your neighborhood council, become ingrained in the community that you live or you want to work in, because that's where you learn what is important, what are the pressures being felt in that community, and how do we help through design. I know Chicago at least is very neighborhood centered. There's a lot of small neighborhood organizations, mostly in every neighborhood. We just have to find it and join and kind of join the conversation.
Yeah.
I would plus one that I actually, when I was practicing law and I bought my first house in a community called Historic Anacostia. It's in Washington, D.C. It's east of the river. And one of the identified lower income areas, but rich in culture. And I actually was able to volunteer a lot. So while you're young, get as much experience, but volunteer, get active. And we did some of the coolest stuff ever when I was volunteering. You get to see what it's like to be a community member, but for example, we started a community marketing campaign inspired by the first Whole Foods that came to the District of Columbia to get a sit-down restaurant called Busboys and Poets to move into historic Anacostia, and it worked. And we created a beautiful flyer inspired by Beyonce, actually, before her Cowboy Carters, like 15 years before she released Cowboy Carter, but she had put out pictures inspired by the country movement. And we followed that kind of template and we created something new. It was also when I was volunteering as a young attorney that I ended up serving on the city's Historic Preservation Review Board. So think about where are those opportunities, because particularly early in your career, getting the experience is more important than getting the income. And you want to know how to work with people. You want to work with as many different people as you can. And then, I started to see who were the resources. And that helped me later in my career. I pride myself on being resourceful, but it's because I worked with so many people on the volunteer side and really saw who was doing great work. And And while you're young in your career, it's such an exciting time.
That's great. Great advice. Thank you for that, Catherine. Roger, advice for students,
Um,
young designers.
You know, one of the things that I've started coming around to is thinking about whether or not the agents for these changes that we've been talking about the last hour might be better accomplished through design build practice as opposed through conventional developers who honestly don't add a lot of value or innovation. They do a lot of number crunching, but the people who are really taking the risk and doing the work where it really needs to be done are designers and builders. And the problem has been, in many ways, that designing, building, and developing are divorced from each other in this country. But if one looks historically at the production of housing throughout the world, it has oftentimes been done by designer builders. Yeah, tradespeople who have produced hundreds and thousands of units throughout cities. So I would actually suggest that maybe they start researching new methods of delivery that they might actually join as opposed to being just in design alone. The other thing I would say parenthetically is that the Bloomberg City Lab has a kind of an online publication of housing typologies around the world that they put out every few months or so, a different one. And that might be interesting and very eye-opening just to see as you look around the world. They have plans and sections and pictures of what makes Paris, Paris, what makes Berlin, Berlin, what makes Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe. And I really find that fascinating because it tells you, it's that DNA thing that I was talking about before. And it would get one to thinking about how one could develop the DNA for today, given our current lifestyles and different climates in our cities.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much to each of you. We started this conversation with the words shelter, comfort, safety, identity, and dignity. We're obviously adding to that innovative partnerships, understanding policy, being an advocate. Thank you so much for this incredibly informative conversation. Thank you for joining IIDA for Collective Design. Audience, thank you so much for your fantastic questions. Everybody be well, be safe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Collective Design. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.